On the night before her daughter was born, Rebecca Monroe stood alone on the porch, one hand on her belly, watching 6 German shepherds line up in complete silence. They didn't bark. They didn't move. And for the first time, she had the chilling feeling that they already knew who was coming. If this already pulls you in, like, share, and subscribe, because this story is just beginning. Rain moved in softly, tapping the porch rail and darkening the old cedar boards. A single porch light burned low, turning the yard into a small island of gold in the night. Rebecca Monroe was 35, and she carried her pregnancy the way some people carried grief, carefully, quietly, as if sudden movement might wake something that had been sleeping. She stood in the doorway with one hand resting on her belly, wearing the same light gray knitted sweater and dark blue jeans she wore most days, white sneakers dulled from years of walking this neighborhood alone. Her dark brown hair hung to her shoulders, a little damp at the ends. She did not call out. She did not need to. 6 German shepherds had already gathered in front of her, as if summoned by a bell no human could hear. They lined up without noise, broad chests steady, ears angled forward, their black and tan coats catching the porch light in quiet bands. At the front lay Kaiser, 7 years old, large and muscular, a dark brown, worn leather collar on his neck without a tag. His eyes stayed on Rebecca with a stillness that unsettled her. It was not the look of a dog waiting for permission. It was the look of someone keeping watch. In that silence, Rebecca felt something strange and cold brush past her thoughts, the sense that they already knew who was coming. People in town had opinions, and they offered them like weather reports, unsolicited, certain, and always a little dramatic. At the clinic, a nurse with tired eyes, had once said, gentle but firm, 6 big dogs and a newborn, you'll have to be careful, honey. An older neighbor, Mrs. Halverson, had gone further, leaning on her mailbox in a quilted coat, and warning in a thin voice, it only takes one mistake. Rebecca had nodded, because arguing did not change fear. She lived in a small house at the edge of a quiet street, where trucks sometimes cut through too fast, where porch lights mattered, where loneliness could feel like a second roof. The dogs were not a hobby. They were the family she had built when life took something from her and left no instructions on how to start again. No one in town knew all of it. They saw her walking the pack at dawn, saw her keep to herself, saw her hand rest on Kaiser's head for a heartbeat longer than necessary. They did not see the nights she sat on the living room floor, listening to her own breathing until it stopped shaking. They did not see that she had learned to trust what stayed. On that porch, with rain stitching the dark together, Rebecca watched Kaiser's gaze and felt her chest tighten. Not with fear of him, but with fear of herself. She had always been steady with the dogs. She knew their routines, their boundaries, the way they followed her tone more than her words. But this was different. This one was a child. This was a life so small it could fit in the crook of an elbow. In her mind, she could already hear the warnings again. Only takes one mistake. Be careful, like an old hymn sung off-key. She imagined the crib in the corner of the bedroom, the soft rise and fall of a tiny chest, the sound of little cries in the night. She imagined paws on wood, nails clicking, shadows moving in the hallway. Her stomach turned, and not from pregnancy. Kaiser did not step forward. He did not press into her. He simply held the line, steady as a fence in a storm, and the other dogs took their cue from him, still, attentive, contained. Rebecca realized then that the silence was not emptiness. It was discipline. It was restraint. It was something like respect. The thought did not erase her worry, but it gave it shape, the way a candle gives shape to a room. She breathed out slowly and let her hand fall from her belly to the top of Kaiser's head. His fur was damp and warm under her palm. He did not flinch. He did not lean in. He accepted the touch as if it belonged to both of them. In that simple contact, a memory surfaced. Her own hand once held by someone who had promised to stay, a promise that did not survive. Rebecca did not speak that name aloud. She had learned that some names were heavy enough to bend a night. Instead, she spoke to Kaiser in a low voice, the way a person speaks when she is trying not to cry. "Not like that," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was instructing, him or her fear. Kaiser's ears shifted just slightly, and the pack remained calm. Rebecca looked past them into the yard where rain darkened the grass, and she felt something inside her settle into a new place. It was not certainty. It was not perfect faith. It was a small, stubborn decision. She would bring her daughter home. She would introduce her with care. She would watch and learn and trust what was good. And if love could be taught, she would teach it, first to herself, and then to the life about to arrive. Morning arrived, pale and slow, light slipping through thin clouds and settling on the wooden floor like dust that refused to rise. Rebecca Monroe brought her daughter home the way a person carries something fragile across ice, slow steps, eyes down, breath measured. Olivia slept against her chest, small and warm, wrapped in a blanket the color of milk. Rebecca's arms ached, but she welcomed the ache. It reminded her that this was real. The house smelled of old wood and coffee grounds, familiar and steady, yet altered by the weight of a new life. The dogs did not rush her. They waited. Kaiser lay near the doorway, his black and tan coat dark against the floor, his head lifted but still. Rebecca bent, placed Olivia's blanket on the living room rug, and stepped back. One of the younger dogs shifted, a low sound forming in its chest, but Kaiser released a quiet warning. No teeth, no movement, just a sound that carried authority. The room settled. Rebecca watched with a tight chest and a mind that ran ahead of her courage. She had rehearsed this moment alone, imagined a dozen ways it could go wrong. She had not imagined the restraint. She felt it then, like a held breath, shared by all of them. She tested the world the way she always had, carefully, with substitutes. A simple doll rested in the crib, wrapped as Olivia would be. Rebecca stood at the doorway and waited. The dogs approached in order, noses low, movements contained. Kaiser reached the crib first, paused, then turned his head away as if to say enough. Rebecca felt her knees loosen. It wasn't relief yet. It was something thinner. Permission, maybe. Still, when night came, fear returned with it. The house creaked as it always had, but every sound now arrived louder. Rebecca lay awake, one hand resting on Olivia's small back, counting breaths until numbers blurred. From the hallway came the soft click of nails on wood. Her heart tightened. She listened harder. The sounds passed, returned, passed again. When she finally lifted her head, she saw them. Shadows stationed along the hall, Kaiser nearest the door, his body angled outward. They did not cross the threshold. They did not look at the crib. They faced the dark. Rebecca swallowed and let her head fall back to the pillow. She did not sleep, but she did not rise either. In the quiet hours before dawn, memory has a way of speaking plainly. Rebecca thought of promises once made in the same bed, words said with confidence that did not survive time. She thought of how trust had left her life not all at once, but in pieces small enough to excuse. She had learned to forgive without forgetting, to build again, slowly, with what remained. The dogs had taught her that, consistency, the long work of staying. As the night thinned, Olivia stirred and released a sound so small it was almost a sigh. Kaiser shifted his weight. Rebecca felt it before she saw it, a change in the air. He did not approach. He did not need to. The message was simple. I am here. She felt tears gather, not from fear this time, but from the exhaustion of holding herself upright for so long. In that moment, she allowed herself a small mercy. She believed that watchfulness could be gentle, that protection did not always announce itself. When light finally touched the edge of the crib, Rebecca closed her eyes and whispered a promise she did not speak aloud, to watch as carefully as they did, and to teach love the shape of patience. By afternoon, the house had found a new rhythm. Rebecca moved between rooms with Olivia against her shoulder, the dogs parting and reforming without instruction. The blanket on the floor remained where she had placed it, now carrying the quiet weight of acceptance. Rebecca knelt and pressed her palm to it, then to Kaiser's broad head. His fur was warm, his breath steady. She did not thank him. She knew better than to name what had been given. Instead, she looked around the room, at the scuffed floorboards, the worn couch, the life she had chosen to keep, and felt something settle into place. It was not certainty. It was a steadier thing, a belief that care, when practiced daily, could hold even the most fragile beginnings. She rose with Olivia in her arms, walked toward the bedroom, and let the door remain open. The night would come again. She would be ready. Late afternoon light drifted through the windows, thin and amber, settling on the crib and the worn floorboards as if the house itself were holding its breath. The day Olivia officially came home was the day Rebecca learned how loud silence could be. She stood near the doorway, her shoulders tight beneath the gray sweater, her eyes fixed on the small bundle resting in the crib. The dogs waited only a moment before moving. 6 bodies rose almost at once. Rebecca's chest seized. Her mouth opened on instinct, a sharp warning already forming. She had rehearsed this fear too. But then she saw Kaiser. He moved first, but not quickly. His large frame crossed the room with measured steps, his dark eyes steady, his ears relaxed. There was no urgency in him, no hunger, no curiosity sharpened into danger, just intent. The others followed his pace as if tied to it. Rebecca felt her voice catch in her throat. Something in Kaiser's gaze, deep, anchored, without demand, stopped her from shouting. She pressed her lips together and watched. It was the hardest stillness she had ever chosen. The dogs approached the crib as one, then broke into quiet order. Noses lowered, breaths softened. One by one, they leaned in and drew back. No pushing, no sound beyond the soft exhale of warm air. A tongue brushed the edge of the blanket, careful, brief. Then they settled, forming a loose circle around the crib, bodies angled outward. Kaiser lay closest. When Olivia stirred and let out a thin cry, he lifted his head, then turned it away, giving Rebecca the space she needed to step forward. That gesture stayed with her. Not withdrawal, respect. Rebecca reached into the crib and lifted her daughter, feeling the small weight press into her shoulder. As she rocked, she noticed the dogs did not watch her hands. They watched the room. They watched the door. Something in her chest loosened. Not fear leaving, fear rarely does that, but something heavier than fear finally being set down. Rebecca sank into the chair by the window, Olivia breathing softly against her neck. Her thoughts drifted, uninvited, to years when trust had meant exposure, to moments when she had believed too quickly and paid for it slowly. She had learned then that love without boundaries could bruise. Watching Kaiser now, she understood another truth. Boundaries could also protect. He was not claiming Olivia. He was acknowledging her. The difference mattered. Rebecca felt a quiet warmth behind her eyes, a pressure that did not break into tears. She remembered her own mother's hands, how they had hovered rather than held when life grew uncertain. She had mistaken that distance for strength. Sitting there, with dogs standing guard and a child breathing against her skin, she felt something else take root. Strength could be gentle. It could step back when stepping forward would overwhelm. Kaiser's restraint felt like a lesson given without words, one she had waited a long time to learn. As evening settled, the room returned to ordinary sounds. The click of the heater, the sigh of wood cooling, the faint rustle of fur as the dog shifted. Rebecca stood and placed Olivia back in the crib. The dogs remained where they were. Kaiser did not look at her this time. He did not need to. Rebecca smoothed the blanket and stepped away, leaving the space intact. In that small act, she felt a promise take shape, not a vow spoken aloud, but a belief she could live with. She would not lead with fear. She would watch and listen and learn, and she would trust that love, when it knew its limits, could still be vast. Late afternoon lay heavy on the yard, the light thinning, the air still, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Rebecca watched Olivia take her small, unsteady steps across the grass, arms lifted for balance, breath caught somewhere between laughter and effort. The boards of the back porch were warm beneath Rebecca's bare feet. Kaiser rested nearby, his body low, his head tracking every movement without urgency. The other dogs lingered farther back, spread wide, content to watch. Rebecca allowed herself a moment of ease. Just a moment. She turned to reach for a towel left on the rail, her eyes leaving the yard for no more than a breath. It was enough. The sound came first. Kaiser's bark, sharp and sudden, tearing through the quiet, like a crack of wood splitting. It was not a warning she had heard before. It carried fear. Rebecca spun back toward the yard, her heart already racing ahead of her body. Olivia stood at the edge of the grass, small shoes inches from the narrow road that cut behind the house. A delivery truck rounded the bend too fast, its engine loud, careless. Rebecca's legs weakened. The distance between them felt impossibly wide. Time did not stop, but it slowed, as if mercy had found a way in. Kaiser moved without hesitation. He placed himself between Olivia and the road, broad shoulders squared, teeth bared, not in anger, but resolve. The other dogs surged forward, not chaotic, not loud, just present, forming a living line that closed the space Olivia did not yet understand. The truck horn blared, tires screamed. Rebecca felt the ground tilt beneath her. She did not scream. She could not. Her voice had nowhere to go. She watched Kaiser stand his ground, watched the driver brake hard, watched the moment tip back toward life. When Rebecca reached Olivia, she fell to her knees and gathered her daughter into her arms, pressing her face into the child's soft hair, breathing her in as if breath itself could be lost. Her tears came then, quiet and shaking. She held on because letting go felt impossible. The yard settled again, but Rebecca did not. Her hands trembled against Olivia's back. She could feel her own pulse, loud and uneven. And beneath it, the steady presence of the dogs, the sound of their breathing returning to normal. Kaiser turned away first, as if the work were finished. Rebecca saw it then, the difference between fear and purpose. He had not chased the truck. He had not lunged. He had placed himself where he was needed and trusted the rest to follow. In that stillness, memory surfaced without asking. Moments in her life when she had wished someone would step in, stand firm, take the blow meant for her. Moments when no one had. She had learned to endure instead. Watching Kaiser now, she understood something she had missed before. Protection was not loud. It did not ask for recognition. It arrived, did what it must, and withdrew. Rebecca pressed her forehead to Olivia's and whispered nothing. Words felt too small. What mattered had already been said. As the truck disappeared down the road, Rebecca carried Olivia back to the porch and sat on the steps. The dogs settled around her, not crowding, not demanding. Kaiser sat facing the yard, his back to her, keeping watch even now. Rebecca studied the worn grain of the wood beneath her hands, the small scratches left by years of living. She felt older in that moment, not from fear, but from understanding. Life did not promise safety. It offered chances. Sometimes those chances arrived on four legs, silent and certain. Rebecca rested her hand on Kaiser's shoulder. He did not look back. He did not need to. In the quiet that followed, Rebecca made a vow she would keep, not to control every danger, not to shield her child from the world, but to honor the guardianship she had been given, to trust, to stay present, to remember that love, when it stands its ground, can change the ending. The rain returned in the evening, light and patient, washing the dust from the road and leaving the yard darker, quieter, newly clean. After that day, Rebecca Monroe changed in ways no one announced. She did not speak about the truck, or the sound of Kaiser's bark, or the way her knees had nearly failed her. She made smaller changes instead. A sign appeared by the front gate, hand-painted, the letters steady but imperfect. Here lives a child, and faithful guardians. Rebecca was 36 now, her hair beginning to show a few pale strands she did not hide. She wore the same gray sweater, the same jeans, and carried herself with a softness that had learned where it could rest. Neighbors slowed when they passed. Some nodded. Some stopped to read the sign. Mrs. Halverson came one morning with a loaf of bread wrapped in a towel, her voice thinner than before, her eyes kinder. Rebecca thanked her and said nothing else. The dogs watched from the porch, calm and alert, Kaiser seated at the edge of the steps like a sentry carved from patience. Rebecca felt no need to explain. The sign was enough. It did not warn. It welcomed. It named what mattered. Time, when allowed to move at its own pace, does its work quietly. Olivia grew steady on her feet. She learned the rooms by sound and texture, the hum of the refrigerator, the cool shadow under the table, the warm patch of sun by the window. The dogs moved with her as water moves around stone, never rushing, never blocking, always aware. Kaiser aged too. His muzzle lightened, his steps slowed, but his attention never thinned. Rebecca watched them together from the kitchen doorway, coffee cooling in her hands. She thought of the years she had lived braced for loss, of how she had mistaken vigilance for fear. One afternoon, as rain tapped the glass and the house breathed its familiar creaks, Olivia looked up from the floor where she sat among paws and tails. She lifted her chin and said a single word, careful and bright. Kai. Rebecca laughed before she cried, the sound breaking open a place she had kept closed. Kaiser did not react. He did not need to. The name had landed. It belonged. There were nights when memory returned without invitation. Rebecca would wake to the sound of rain or wind and feel the old ache of absence. She no longer fought it. She let it pass through her, like weather. In those hours, Kaiser would rise and take his place by the bedroom door, facing outward, his presence a quiet answer to questions she no longer asked aloud. Rebecca understood then that forgiveness was not a single act. It was a practice. It was choosing not to harden when softness was still possible. She had forgiven herself for what she could not control. She had forgiven the world for being careless, and she had learned to accept the gift she had been given without bargaining it away. The dogs did not ask for gratitude. They asked only for place and purpose. Rebecca gave them both. On the night the rain eased into a whisper, Rebecca stood in the doorway and watched Olivia sleep. The dogs lay around the small body, a loose circle of warmth and breath. Kaiser rested at the edge, his back to them, eyes on the hall. The porch light glowed through the window, touching the worn wood and the sign outside. Rebecca did not step closer. She did not need to. She felt the truth settle into her bones, steady and sure. Family was not always made by blood. Sometimes it was made by those who stood their ground when it mattered, who knew when to step forward and when to step back, who loved without possession and protected without noise. Rebecca turned off the light and let the door remain open. The house held its quiet. The night passed, and in that passing she kept her faith. As this story comes to an end, I want to speak to those of you watching in quiet rooms, in late evenings, or in long mornings where the body feels heavier than it used to. Growing older often brings more than wrinkles. It brings silence. It brings memories that return uninvited. It brings illness, aching joints, tired hearts, and days when loneliness feels louder than any noise. But this story is a reminder of something gentle and true. You still matter. Your presence still matters. Love does not stop looking for you. Sometimes comfort comes from places we never expected. A loyal companion, a small routine, a quiet prayer, or simply being seen and heard even through a screen. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might be feeling alone today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words may comfort another soul more than you know. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to this channel so we can continue walking these quiet roads together. May God bless you. May He give you strength in your body, peace in your heart, and comfort in your lonely moments. You are not forgotten.